Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war frontline update for the 4th of May 2023. May the 4th be with you, as I have already said today in my news video. Right, let's go to first the ISW. I'm going to just build on a little bit of what I said in the news piece about the Kremlin attack. I know this isn't frontline necessarily, but it's the ISW report on it in their preamble to their daily report. Russia likely staged this attack as an attempt to bring the war home to a Russian domestic audience and set conditions for a wider societal mobilization. I'm still unsure. I side slightly with Ukraine didn't do it. I don't know who did, but I don't think the Ukrainian government would have done this. It's just too counterproductive. But the rationale given by the ISW, Russian authorities have recently taken steps to increase Russian domestic air defense capabilities, including within Moscow itself. And it's extremely likely that two drones would have penetrated multiple layers of air defense and detonated or have been shot just over the heart of the Kremlin in a way that provided spectacular imagery caught nicely on camera. A strike, you got Pantsir air defenses there. A strike that that avoided detection and destruction by such air defense assets and succeeded in hitting as high profile of a target as a Kremlin's Senate palace would be a significant embarrassment for Russia. The Kremlin's immediate, coherent, and coordinated response to the incident suggests that the attack was internally prepared in such a way that its intended political effects outweigh its embarrassment. The Kremlin immediately accused Ukraine of conducting a terror attack, and Russian official responses coalesced rapidly around this accusation. If the drone attack had not been internally staged, it would have been a surprise event. It is very likely that the official Russian response would initially have been much more disorganized as Russian officials scrambled to generate a coherent narrative and offset the rhetorical implications of a clear informational embarrassment. And actually, it uses a couple of examples here. So when the Balaklia massacre of all the mechanized equipment that was lost at Balaklia at the crossing of the river a couple of times in a row, they lost like 100 pieces of equipment. The Kherson city withdrawal, they didn't really have a timely and coherent informational response to those humiliations, and yet they did here. They were like straight on it. So anyway, ISW continues rapid and coherent presentation of an official Russian narrative around the strike suggests that Russia staged this incident in close proximity to the May the 9th Victory Day holiday in order to frame the war as an existential to its domestic audience. Some Russian nationalist mill bloggers seized on the Kremlin drone strike to call for Russian escalation in the war, despite the fact that Russia currently lacks a military capability to do so. I was thinking about this. What is the escalation? The only thing they've got is nuclear. They can't escalate anymore, or biological maybe, because actually they're using everything they can. They've got some Kinzhals, but how many of them do they have? They've already used them before. Where can they go in terms of escalation? Just do more of the same. So I think, if anything, it's going to be about mobilization. The Kremlin may be planning to conduct other false flag operations and increase disinformation ahead of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in order to increase domestic support for the war. And I broadly agree with that. I agree with that rationale. It all makes sense. It's just whether that is what happened or I just don't know. I still don't know. But I am slightly siding. As I said, I'm siding not necessarily that it was Russia, but it definitely wasn't the Ukrainian government. I'd be very surprised if it was, because if it was a really silly choice of actions, I think, as I explained earlier. Anyway, let's go on to the front line, northeast sector, Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna. Not a lot to report, really. Not a lot going along on the front lines in terms of skirmishes. You got Bilorivka just below Kreminna, Bakhmut, New York area, Adivka, Novomykhailivka just down here, and that's about it. That's about it for the whole front line, so you can go now. Okay, let's just pop into the ISW. It says that there were repelled operations in Dubrova, Bilohorivka, and then the Russian mill blogger claimed that there were Russian attempts at Novoselivska, Dubrova, and the Serebyanska forest. Cherevati, Ukrainian spokesman, It's noted that the Russian forces fired over 565 artillery rounds at Ukrainian positions on this front and engaged in 11 combat clashes on the line during the day. Okay, so going to my map, we've got Kupiansk here. We have Kuzamivka is where Novoselivska is where there was some activity according to Russian mill bloggers. And then other than that, it's coming down from Svatova here. As we come down to the forest near Kreminna, you've got Dobrova just here, some activity there. And then Bilohorivka just here. Now, Bilohorivka, there were some claims, some interesting things on the socials, which is the Russians saying, we're definitely not surrounded in Bilohorivka. We are not surrounded in Bilohorivka. And everyone else going, we never said you were. And then people were taking the mickey out of that, saying, Ukrainians were saying nothing, and the Russians are saying, we're definitely not surrounded, which would suggest that they probably are surrounded because no one was claiming they were. And so for them to deny it, oddly like that, then possibly they are. Anyway, there has been attacks around here. As you can see, there's a plant there. According to Syriac maps, they're going towards it, the filtration plant. So just to the east of that filtration plant. So on my map, that is this area here, which I already have in their control anyway. So I don't Syriac maps. Maybe something changed over time, but I've got that under their control. But they are claiming that the Russians have advanced 1.5 kilometers, these pro-Russian mappers, and reached the Zakidna filtration plant at the southeastern outskirts of Bilohorivka. There were these claims on the socials, as I say. About 100 Russian soldiers were surrounded near Bilohorivka. The situation is critical. That was as according to some, and that could be what the Russians were responding to. I don't know whether that was a Russian post itself, though, that was saying that. And then Ukrainians got hold of that. But anyway, something's going on in Bilohorivka, and it was reported in the ISW as well, which is reporting live UA, like the general staff live UA map suggests there's activity there. So definitely something happening in Bilohorivka. We shall see what that entails in the next few days, no doubt. And then really we're moving on already to Bakhmut. There is not a crazy amount of information coming out about Bakhmut. It really does seem to have calmed down. The Ukrainians are on very much the edge of Bakhmut. They're pushed back to a very small amount of territory, as the ISW states here. Ukrainian forces control, according to Prigozhin yesterday, 2 days ago, Ukrainians controlled 2.7 square kilometers of Bakhmut. The ISW actually assessed they control 1.89 square kilometers of Bakhmut, even less than that. Geolocated footage from May the 2nd and 3rd shows that Russian forces have advanced closer to the 00506 highway, northwest of Kromova. I showed you this yesterday and showed that they hadn't advanced any further. We'll see what the claims are today. This is one of my favorite parts of the mapping, is where I take the ISW claims of Russian advances and I put them, geolocate them on my map, and I go, they haven't advanced, or they have. And captured the Bakhmut Medical College in western Bakhmut. Okay, let's look at some of these. So we have the Ukrainians using kamikaze, first-person view kamikaze drones with a tonic warhead on Russian trenches. So the Russians are in these trenches. I won't show that because it is somewhat inappropriate, but that has been geolocated. Okay, right. So this is a little bit of an advance for the Russians. They are in trenches here. Those trenches are in a grey zone. Do they control them? They're getting hammered by them. Again, we get debates about what control really means, but that could indicate some marginal advances for the Russians there. So ISW is on point today. Their second one is the medical college, which the Russians have advanced into, and that can be found here. Medical college is there. That is where geolocated footage suggests that the Russians are at. And again, that I did show that being taken yesterday. And because the ISW does a report at night, the night before the morning I do my this video now, that means that is correct. That is the ground that Deep State showed yesterday that the Russians had taken. So that is both claims are on point today for the ISW. that they have moved forward in the center of Bakhmut and potentially to the north of Bakhmut around Kromova. But again, that refers to activity that I had already noted yesterday. So it's just confirmation of that. Is certainly in the center and up north. Maybe there's a bit of movement for the Russians there. As far as the rest of the claims for Bakhmut go, we'll look at War Mapper Map. There have been no confirmed changes to control since the last update. So that's 2 days for them that there's been no changes. I have no changes on the inside of Bakhmut as according to Syriac Maps, pro-Russian mapper, Deep State Map, pro-Ukrainian mapper. We do have some claims from Poulet Volant here, which I find very interesting, which suggests that the Ukrainians are pushing back in the center, slightly to the south of their lines. It's difficult to say. It's not in the south anymore. But they only control the very western outskirts. So this is pushing back possibly into the industrial college. So that would be interesting if the Ukrainians have done a counterattack to take that back. But I've not seen that reported particularly anywhere else. So we go back to the ISW, see what other claims they have. And that's it for Bakhmut. Um, there are just a few other bits and pieces here saying Bodanivka, unsuccessful attacks. That's north. Ivanivska to the south, Prechene to the south again, southwest of Bakhmut. So no claims about what's gone on inside of Bakhmut, and that's really that. So I guess we'll wait to see. I wonder whether there is some operational security taking place in Bakhmut at the moment, and all up and down the lines. Deep State Map hasn't seemed to have updated the map in the last 24 hours. We've got I talked about Kenneth Gregg, the Swedish fighter in Ukraine at the moment, saying that he's not allowed to report for 48 to 76 hours, or he has to delay things. And so, therefore, we are starting to see operational security ahead of a counter-offensive. Does that also include Bakhmut? It might well do, because actually, but it's been informationally quiet. I don't know whether that reflects that the fighting's been quiet in Bakhmut. I doubt that. But certainly information is still on the ground. We might be seeing a period of the Ukrainians fighting back there. What do Rebar say, the pro-Russian source? On the western outskirts, very little, by the way, about anything going on. So just this bullet point here about Donetsk and this bullet point about Marinka. That's the only activity, like actual sort of assault activity that they talk about. On the western outskirts of Bakhmut, Wagner PMC groups have expanded their zone of control along Paramogi Street. At the same time, the storming of enemy strongholds on Vizotlocheliv Donbasu Street continues. I've butchered that, so sorry about that. Yeah, again, not a great amount of detail. There is just some areas where they are claiming the Russians have made some advance in towards the west, but yeah, other than that, my map has stayed the same. Poulet Volant's map could indicate that my map might need changing tomorrow to indicate that Ukrainian counterattack. Just to remind you, the yellow lines are the pro-Ukrainian mapper, Deep State Map. The red lines are pro-Russian mapper, Syriac maps. So as we come further down here, you'll remember yesterday that I mentioned that there was, Poulet Volant again had a map talking about how just south of New York there was some activity. The Russians had been pushed back 1.5 kilometers there. New York is mentioned in the ISW, the daily report. Not a lot is mentioned. It's mentioned in the general staff. Just gets a mention, but I wonder again whether operational security means they're not really giving you the details, not necessarily the ISW. They are just relying on the general staff of the Ukraine here, giving them or not giving them the details of what's happening there. So there could well be activity in favor of Ukrainians that's happened over the last 24 hours or so that we're just not getting the details of at the moment. And it could be that the Ukrainians have advanced 1.5 kilometers in that area, or maybe not. Talking about this area here, so that's Novobakhmutivka. There in the ISW, we do have so the Russian military defense acknowledged limited Ukrainian counterattacks in the Avdiivka area. The Russian MOD claimed on May the 3rd that Russian forces repelled a Ukrainian ground attack on May the 2nd in an unspecified area of the Alexandro-Kalinyove direction, referring to the area between Avdiivka and Toretsk. So this is up in this area. Um, I guess so. You've got Novokalinove, Alexandropil, um, Alexandro Kalinyove. And then it goes on to say ISW has not observed visual evidence of successful Ukrainian counterattacks in the Avdiivka area, and these attacks are likely part of an ongoing pattern of limited and localized attacks, as the ISW has recently assessed. And then it says Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces are regrouping west of Bakhmutivka. The Ukrainians are targeting Russian firing positions, and that has slowed down the pace of Russian artillery fire. So that's a couple of interesting points there. So west of Bakhmutivka is here. That's Novokalinove. This could be where Russians are gathering themselves, but I find it very interesting and probably accurate that they're having their activity slowed down because of the artillery being hammered by counter battery fire. And today we saw a huge number of artillery systems hit in the daily report. The general staff, including multiple launch rocket systems and air defense systems as well. So 4 air defense systems, 3 MLRS, and I forget what it was, but it was something like 14 or 16 pieces of artillery, I think. So the Russians, their artillery is being targeted in a very explicit manner by the Ukrainians, and that could be having an effect on how the Russians, or it should be having an effect on how the Russians commit to their offensives, their assaults. And here, the Russian mill bloggers complaining about that. Other than that, there's activity in Siverny, Pervomaisky, and then further down south in Marinka and Novomykhailivka, but no other details about any successful counterattacks or Russian attacks in this area. No map changes from either of the mappers. So we'll move south from Avdiivka, knowing that there could be activity around New York that could be in favor of the Ukrainians. And Marinka, if we come to here in the ISW, just the usual sort of mention of Marinka there, which is unsuccessful ground attacks there. Rebar Pro Russian source does say in Marinka, Russian motorized rifle units supported by tanks are engaged in fierce fighting in the low rise building area on the southern outskirts. The assault units broke through the airfield defense near the territory of Gorgaz and gained a foothold in this area. So that would be in the sort of southern area, perhaps in this area where in the industrial area, where they had made some advances. They are now catching up in the middle as they moved across Druzhby Avenue, and they're pushing the Ukrainians to the west of the town. And then really we get onto Zaporizhia, Vuhledar, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Although there's no explicit mention in the ISW about Vuhledar, there's been reported general staff say there's activity around Novomykhailivka there, but no particular details. Vuhledar has an interesting map that suggests that the Ukrainians have taken back territory to the west of Vuhledar, and that includes taking some territory from the Russians, not just sort of grey zone, but taking territory from the Russians to the southwest of Pavlivka, which is what I told you the other day. This is the only sort of map that shows activity that I've seen that extends further than just that area around Pavlivka, which was here. I told you that the Ukrainians had taken back territory there, and that would be interesting because it would then give the Russians something to think about being sort of flanked and whether they need to look behind them in the Pavlivka area. But it seems to, according to Vuhledar, stretch further to the west, south of Prechestivka and on to Zolotonova, and in that direction towards Velika Novosilka. So this whole area might be having Ukrainian counterattacks or probing attacks, reconnaissance and force activity. I've not seen it though anywhere else other than Pulivolon, at least to that extent. As we come to Zaporizhia, the ISW says Russian sources continue to disproportionately amplify claims of routine Ukrainian activity along the Zaporizhia Oblast front line in order to suggest that the counteroffensive may have already begun. Zaporizhia Oblast Occupation Deputy Rogov claimed on May the 3rd that a mechanized Ukrainian group went on the offensive south of Orikhiv and reported that Russian forces stopped the advance and forced Ukrainian troops to withdraw. Rogov has made frequent claims over the past few months that Ukrainian forces are preparing to launch a counteroffensive in Zaporizhia and has frequently used such claims to further information operations, as ISW has previously assessed. Russian mill bloggers and other sources routinely report on Ukrainian activity near Orikhiv. I presume there'll be operational security going on here, so you're not going to be hearing too much from Ukrainian sources. There will be no doubt preliminary activities taking place here in advance of a larger offensive that no doubt will take place somewhere around this Zaporizhia front line here. And then it's a case of coming over, without any firmer details to Kherson and see what the ISW has to say about that. Russian forces conducted heavy air and artillery strikes against the west bank of Kherson Oblast on May the 3rd. Ukraine's Southern Operational Command reported that Russian troops carried out 110 artillery strikes against the west bank with over 550 shells and struck civilian infrastructure in Kherson City. I've shown you some evidence of that this morning in the news report that there were, grocery stores hit, trains being hit. It's just all pretty horrific. A number of people have died. More people have died there over the last 24 hours in Kherson than for some time. And it seems fairly indiscriminate shelling of the city. The Southern Operational Command also reported that Russian tactical aviation launched 5 guided aerial bombs at Kizomis, just west of Kherson City. Russian forces continued to shell along the line of contact in Zaporizhia Oblast. So one would wonder what the target actually was there. Would there be some kind of military installation, some troop accumulation at Kizimis? I don't know. Ukrainian forces continued striking Russian concentration areas on the east bank of Kherson. And that's yesterday. And Ukraine's Southern Operational Command reported that Ukrainian troops conducted 100 fire missions against Russian weapons, equipment, and personnel concentrations on the East Bank. So both of the sides are committing to these attacks. Although the Russians have slightly heavier fire on the Ukrainians. A local Kherson Oblast Telegram channel posted an image of a pamphlet on the East Bank potentially distributed by Ukrainian partisans that warns residents to avoid being near positions of the 205th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade in the Novokakhovka area due to potential Ukrainian strikes on these positions. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian troops shelled a number of settlements along the East Bank on the night of May the 2nd to 3rd. So that is interesting. So 110 attacks from the Russians and 100 attacks from the Ukrainians. I don't know whether that's the same amount of shells they'll be expending each side. As the ISW said, that's 550 shells landing on the Ukrainian side. Will the Ukrainians, although they only had 10 fewer attacks, artillery attacks, does that mean significantly fewer shells? Probably. They tend to use more precision ammunition than the Russians do. Does that mean that their 100 attacks would be more effective than the 110 Russian attacks? I don't know. We can surmise and possibly conclude that on balance they probably would, but I don't have the direct evidence of that. Okay. Well, thank you for that. That was the update for today. Not a lot, but you can tell something is brewing big time, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it pans out. Zaporizhia, I'm sure, will be the epicenter of the upcoming counteroffensive, but there will be other moves. There'll be moves of deception and feints that might end up indicating weak points that then get exploited. So they might start off as a feint or as a distraction and then become a major kind of offensive strike as they end up finding a weakness where the Russian troops are just not well prepared. Anyway, thanks. Take care. Speak to you later.